Okay, welcome to everyone who's here and everyone who is going to be looking at this later on YouTube. I am Stacy Dyson, and this is I cannot tell you which edition of the Aperitif concerts. We are extraordinarily gifted today to have one of our newest DeSoto members, Linda Kai, who is going to be answering some questions and sharing a little bit of her soul, and we'll just kind of go from there. Um, So the first thing that I'm going to ask is the first thing that I ask. Well, let's have you tell us a little bit about yourself first, because I hate reading people's bios because it's never as good as when they introduce themselves. So give us a bit on who you are.
So I was born in Vietnam, raised in Australia, and I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, the unceded lands of the Dene Athabaskan peoples of the Middle Tanana Valley. I'm a former child refugee, and making sense of my life has been my life's journey. And discovering Alaska, a third space, has been one of the best things that has ever happened to me. In Australia, I never felt Vietnamese enough or Australian enough. And yet in Alaska, a third space, I actually got to experience how Australian I am, as well as how Vietnamese I am. And these days when I leave Alaska, I actually experience how Alaskan I am. And I think that's the paradox of becoming part of a place, is you don't realize it until you leave, that it's become a part of you.
So, as threatened, I am going to ask or begin this way I begin every Aperitif concert, and you can interpret it however it is you need to and answer it however you need to. Why poetry, or in your case, storytelling, and why now?
Mm. The first piece that I'll read out is about how I've lived my life moving forward and looking forward, and how I've always had struggles with my memory and with remembering. And it's an act of reclamation and an act of resistance in the midst also of historical erasure of my people's history, as well as the skewed storytelling or the skewed narratives, to be able to claim this is who I am and this is what my internal world is like. And there's so much in terms of exploration and adventure and discovery that I've done externally. I've traveled the world as a solo woman for decades, and yet the interiority of my internal landscape is still new to me. And so storytelling is my way of getting to know myself and to allow that to be witnessed by other people. That's the scary bit, and yet that's the restorative piece.
You mentioned traveling, and I know that you are, for all intents and purposes, never at home. Um, so favorite place so far,
Mm.
besides your own bed? Favorite place.
The places that I've traveled
Well, let's
when
narrow it down since you run around so much. Favorite place this year.
this year. See, there's a physical place and then there's metaphysical places.
I'll take either or both.
My favorite place this year has been the inland saltwater lakes of Australia. When Australia used to be under the ocean, these underground salt aquifers formed. And so now there's these lakes that are filled with salt water that is ancient. And the evaporation rate in the Australian summers means that there's vast amounts of salt in the lake as well as crystals around the lake. And they're pink. And it's like 800 times as salty as seawater, and the magnificent amount of bird life around these lakes is just astounding. It's absolutely astounding. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the physical. What about the
Metaphysical? I
mhm.
think in general, the places that I've traveled when accompanied by someone whom I deeply love. Yeah.
I can rock with that. I like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Tell me about what makes you want to write.
Mm.
Not the process, but what's the trigger as such? What's the push off point? We'll get into the process later.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a story that's tapping at my soul's door. And to paraphrase Dr. Kenneth Hardy, my ears need to hear the words come out of my mouth so that a part of my soul can come back home to me.
Oh, that's gorgeous. I love that. Okay, so we know the how, sort of. Why? I mean, there are a million different ways to express yourself. Why written and spoken? What's the draw?
It's not a draw. It's like there's something that's compelling me forth. So it's almost like an impelling, that there is a story that is knocking at my soul's door and says, I will not give you peace until you allow me to come until you allow my spirit to come into being, not just through words on a page, but through vibration, through your body and your voice into the air, so that my spirit can come alive and be met by
I can understand that.
by the
I'm
people who are
from,
here.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I come from a Southern Baptist tradition, and there is something called, you're not drawn or driven to something, you're called to it. You have to do it. Your soul demands it. So, okay, I get it. Um, so talk to me about process. I mean, do you need to be by yourself? I personally need music somewhere if I'm doing this, either in my head or under my hand, one or the other. I don't have to be in a certain place, but I know that there are folks who do. So, what do you need to get the words out?
Uh, I just need space, and typically in nature. And lately I've been recording my voice. Like it's something's coming to me so rapidly that I need to just allow it to come through me, and then afterwards I'll polish the words. But yeah, lately I've been recording. But prior to that, it would be painful. Like there's a lot of crying involved. Like yeah, so a box of tissues or
I,
or an old shirt. Give me something
I,
to put my nose on.
I don't know what to tell you, honey. I'd like to tell you that gets better, but it doesn't. But yeah, tissues and old shirts. Yeah, sure. Because linen handkerchiefs are expensive. Um, so right now, um, because I'm a great one for, I don't want to hear about where you're going because that changes. I want to hear about where you've been. The thing that affected you most. Where have you been?
I think the thing that's affected me most is that I don't know, I didn't know where I've been. So I have lived most of my life without an origin story. And without an origin story, one is bereft of roots and a sense of who I am and who I come from and where I come from. And that has left me feeling rather like a leaf blowing in the breeze, or like dust blowing in the air. Yeah.
That sense of, shall we say, rootlessness, for lack of a better
Mhm.
phrase.
Mhm.
To me, in some ways, that implies a certain freedom. Yes, or no.
Yes. Yes, it's a both and. Like, yes, there's a freedom to that, to allowing myself to be like a leaf blowing in the breeze. And at the same time, it's like being a hot potato. Like, as soon as the leaf touches the ground, I can only touch the ground for so long before I'm hoping for another gust of wind to pick me up and carry me forth again. It's a strange feeling to be connected to a place.
You used the really interesting word that you said, hoping for another breeze,
Yeah,
another wind.
yeah.
Um, is that an eternal hope, or do you want the breeze to stop blowing at some point?
Mm, mm.
I can't think of anything right now that I want to do more
Yeah.
um, than travel and never stop. But I know that there are people who travel all the time who just want to go home and never go anywhere else again. So do you fall
You know,
on one side or the other, or haven't you made that decision yet?
well, in my 20s, I traveled a lot, for work as well as for play, and it was its own form of denial and escapism. And yet there was something I needed to move out of my nervous system or move through my nervous system in a strange way. It's almost like a repetition compulsion. In my family being former refugees, it's like, can I just live light and only live with what I'm carrying? And how long can I do this for? And enjoy it, perhaps even master it before eventually my soul yearns for something that I've never experienced. And then the work begins of the unknown and the unknowable, because that's the paradox. The traveling brings so much unknown and unknowable, and yet after a while it becomes the known. And the unknown is actually becoming part of a community, part of a place.
Is that always the end game, or is there something else?
I don't know. I think I've lived a lot of my life being an enigma, even to myself. And so
I love it.
it's
No, I love that. Um, no, folks who say, yes, I know myself completely and I know who I am and who I just make me nervous. So people who say, you know what, I'm not sure yet, that word, that's honest as far
Mhm.
as I'm concerned. Um, so enough with, the heavy philosophical stuff. Let's move softball stuff, like ice cream or frozen yogurt, Cheez-Its or Ritz crackers. What is, let's start, what is your favorite thing to nosh on?
I love spam.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Yeah.
I should have probably made sure everybody's mic was muted before you answered that.
No, it's okay. I love spam straight out of a can. I love spam that's been fried. I love spam when it's cubed and fried. Like, I just love spam.
Okay,
I love
okay.
spam musubi. Spam flavored macadamia nuts from Hawaii.
Are you
Ah,
serious?
yes.
I have never heard of or imagined such a thing. Spam flavored macadamia. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. That's what makes horse races. Um, is there one thing that you absolutely refuse to eat?
Mm.
I mean, with me, it's cooked spinach and kidneys. I just no. And my mother used to serve it all the time, which is why I refuse to even look at it now. What is that thing for you, or is there that thing for you?
No, no, no. See, I was raised in such abject poverty. Like, I was raised with communist food rations and living in a refugee camp with food rations. I eat everything.
Okay, that's fair. That's completely fair. I know you talk a lot about.
Oh, I'll
Go
pause
ahead.
there.
Okay.
I live in Alaska. So at one point, one of our buddies trapped a lynx, and, like, trapped for the fur, but you might as well make most use of the animal. And so I cooked up the lynx. And I remember how much it smelled like cat, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Okay.
like, oh, beautiful domestic. Oh, yeah. And then, there comes a collapse between the wild and the domestic. And so that I had a real struggle with. Mm.
links
Yeah.
and spam macadamia nuts. Okay. I wish I had more time to interview you because this just got me off onto a whole different thing that I was considering. We'll have to do a cookbook at some point, but we're going to go ahead and turn the spotlight completely on you. Let you do your thing. We're going to keep our mics muted, please. If there's a question that you have for Linda, put it in the chat, and if we've got time, we'll make sure that she goes ahead and talks on that a little bit before she signs off for the evening. But, folks, it is our and my great, great pleasure to give the mic over to the incomparable Linda Ty.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you to Soro. Oh, okay. I've lived my life as if walking backwards through the snow, erasing my footsteps as soon as they appear. If I remember nothing, then there will be nothing to forget. I have so few photos of the first 46 years of my life. I'm taking photos now to remember that I existed, that I am real. It's rather surreal to let myself remember that I am real. Part of the refugee survival imperative is to always keep moving forward. Don't look back, forget the horrors, forget the love you've left behind. It's best to not remember so that there will be nothing to forget. Move through the world invisible, erase myself before anyone else can. I can remember now, and I can let myself be a real little girl. This next piece is titled, I Came to Alaska to Hide from the World. For my soul, it was a matter of survival. Living in society was death by 1,000 cuts. I needed to find another way to live outside of the overstimulation of modern life and the soul-crushing requirements of capitalism to escape the pressures of the model minority myth. Discovering Alaska allowed for a first-person relationship with nature, fishing and hunting, wildlife viewing and camping, building a cabin in the woods, picking berries and growing veggies, preserving the harvest, cutting firewood, singing to the wide open tundra. The simple life. We live without magazines. We haven't had a television since last century. There's no highway billboards here because they're banned. So the only interface that I had with people here was with real people. It was only in 2016 that I begrudgingly got a cell phone. My husband got a cell phone around 2012. Every day before he left town to come home, he'd call the home landline to see if I needed anything. Of course, I rarely needed anything, but the sweetness of being thought of was reinforced at the same time, every day. There were a few seasons where my husband and I had neither cell phone nor landline. We would use the payphone at the gas station down the hill on our way into town or back from town. There were also a few seasons when my husband did remote location work. Back then, satellite phone calls were expensive, and I didn't have a landline anyway. So we'd write letters that would take about a month to get to each other. Slow love. Slowly is the way that I want to love you. I'll take my time. You'll take yours too. Slowly is the way that I want to love you. I'll take my time. You'll take yours too. Melody and lyrics from my friend, Jessie French. People would randomly drop by, whether we were at home or not, and we'd do the same. I couldn't imagine living somewhere where you locked your doors. Sometimes it would take us months to figure out how berries magically appeared in our freezer or cookies on our kitchen counter. And if we saw you at the store, we'd take that opportunity to catch up on your news and the news of others in our community of friends, as well as share news to be passed around. It's so joyous to live amongst other hippie rednecks. It would delight my heart that Karen and Marcus have a television that they keep in the cupboard to be pulled out for special occasions like the Olympics. Before they got their television, we'd all go to the pub to watch the presidential debates because none of our friends had TVs. I remember in graduate school, an online program out of Boston, which included folks from all over the lower 48, that people were shocked, as well as making fun of me because I had no idea about famous people or popular television shows or what HBO is. I struggle. I struggle to communicate the freedom that exists when you live in the woods, operate on tundra timelessness, and all that matters is firewood for warmth and melted snow for water. This next piece is titled The Great Unlearning. It happens. Every time Caleb goes fishing or hunting, he walks in the door and I look at him expectantly. How was it? And I never know whether he's fucking with my impatience or, but he always gives me the entire blow by blow of the fishing adventures. Well, I got there late on Friday. We fished all night and got one fish between all four of us, yada, yada, blah, 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 blah. Awesome spam and egg burritos, yada, yada. Sunday, 2 fish, yada, yada. Blasting sand in my face, terrible windburn, no fish. 3 a.m. alarm on Monday morning, so tempting to sleep in. 4:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. We got like a bunch of salmon and more, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. And all I want to know is how many fish he got that will go into our freezers for the winter. And all he wants to tell me is how much fun he had, because fishing isn't about getting fish and hunting isn't about getting an animal. It's a byproduct of time spent in the outdoors with friends, a byproduct of being a part of nature. And this totally exposes my extractive philosophical relationship to the land, which is rooted in such internalized toxic capitalism and colonial thinking overlaid with lived experiences of poverty, starvation, and food rations. Capitalism has warped my perception of the value of a human life, as well as all life forms on this beautiful and bountiful planet. I used to be way worse. I used to calculate how many pounds of fish he'd come home with, multiplied by market rates, minus gas money, divided by hours of labour, so that there was a dollar value upon his time and upon our freezer supplies, so that I could justify my hippie redneck lifestyle choices to my parents and to my harsh inner economist and to my inner starving, destitute refugee child. And yet, growing up poor, money was always on my mind. I had to justify every penny and rationalize every decision and action based upon economic scarcity and time poverty. The fear of missing out on the fruits of capitalism collides with survivor guilt, where hustle culture meets the grinding hand-to-mouth drudgery of going without in order to get ahead at a paralyzingly slow pace. Alaska has allowed me to become aware and to unlearn. This piece is titled The Journey of How I Learned That I Come from a Colonized People. It was 2018. I was contracted to teach stress reduction and relaxation techniques in a weekly class for Alaska Native elders for a local human services agency. When I was introduced into a room of 50 elders, I introduced myself in accordance to the local custom. And so in my mother tongue, I named myself, my parents, my grandparents, and then I did the same in English. Chào các bác, tên tôi là Thái Kim Ngọc, tên cha tôi là Thái Văn Nam. Ông nội tôi là Thái Khú, bà nội tôi là Dư Thị Kiển, mẹ tôi là Dương Thu Hà. Ông ngoại tôi là Dương Văn Úc, bà ngoại tôi là Nguyễn Thị Kiên. My name is Linda Tai. My father is Tai Van Nam. His parents are Tai Hu and Yu Thị Kiển. My mother is Yung Tu Ha and her parents are Yung Văn Úc and Nguyen Thị Kiển. My father's family is from Ba Swing and my mother's family is from Sóc Trăng. My clan is from southern Vietnam, where the river meets the ocean and yet upstream enough that the water is sweet. I'm the child of merchants and traders and people who tended to the land. I am the daughter of fragrant rice. Vietnam was a French colony right up until the Vietnam War. After the war, my family became refugees and we were accepted into Australia. I discovered Alaska in 2004 when I spent a summer volunteering in Yakutat and have lived in Fairbanks since 2008. I then provided some context and some intention for the stress reduction and relaxation classes. And then there was a pause, that pause of listening and receptivity, that pause where I gracefully shit myself and wonder what happens next. A native elder looks at me gently and thoughtfully. I knew about the Vietnam War, but I did not know that your people were colonized too. Too, like the indigenous peoples of Alaska where I currently live. Too, like the indigenous peoples of Australia where I was raised. Same, but very different, but same. I knew in my head that I come from a colonized peoples, but this time it landed in my heart. I knew in my head because when I was an undergraduate student at Monash University, I took a year of modern Vietnamese history and 2 years of Vietnamese language to find the origin story that would help me to make sense of my life. My Anglo-Saxon professor of modern Vietnamese history and my Vietnamese professors of Vietnamese language, they knew. They knew why I didn't know. They knew why I wanted to know. And they didn't need to ask why I didn't know. And they didn't need to ask why I wanted to know. Because they already knew. I took classes because my parents could not speak about their homelands, share the myths and legends of our people, or sing the songs of our ancestors. Traumatizing the unspoken, it's in the past and yet fully lives on in the present moment. Through the negative space, the weight of that which is absent. The weight of this unspeakable past hung heavy over my life and became a blanket of cultural identity shame. I remember being asked by my elementary school teachers to ask my parents about why we left Vietnam, or to ask about my family tree, or to ask about Vietnam. And just like children of Holocaust survivors, residential school survivors, and combat veterans, we children of refugees become disconnected from our history, from their own history, from my own history. And now I know why I didn't know. And I'm grateful that I found teachers who knew why I didn't know, who deeply understood why I wanted to know, and loved me into knowing. This piece is titled Home versus Homeland. I've spent these last 15 years in Alaska in a way that parallels my parents, for whom Australia is now home and Vietnam is now their homeland. Alaska is now home and Australia has become my homeland. There's a disorientation during the transition period where here is not home and when there is not homeland. A suspended psychological homelessness of being neither here nor there, a liminal space and a threshold betwixt and between all worlds. When I lived in Australia, I never felt home there. I needed a third place, Alaska, which revealed to me the depth of my Australianness and my Vietnameseness. Edward T. Hall, a cross-cultural anthropologist who consulted for the CIA during the Cold War, says that when you travel to somewhere else, you're not actually getting to know the host culture. You're actually getting to know your culture of origin. Alaska, the land of no God, saw me ferociously making food from back home. Moose meat pies from scratch and scrambled eggs on Vegemite toast, salmon steamed in soy sauce, ginger and cilantro, caribou pho, moose egg rolls, wild duck rice paper rolls. It's been 5 years since I've been back to Australia, and truth be known, a part of me has been lollygagging about going back because that part secretly knows that Australia has transitioned from being home to having become my homeland. When I was in London, despite this being my first trip there was surprisingly the nostalgia of a homecoming. The comfort and familiarity of vehicle and foot traffic on the left-hand side of the road. Just like in Australia, the Victorian architecture, the shortbread biscuits in the tea and coffee tray at the hotel, a proper cup of Earl Grey tea with milk and half a sugar, bacon with the rind on, sausage rolls, proper baked beans in tomato sauce, not the sickly sweet kind, like American baked beans. And no guns. Growing up in Australia, I had many Anglo-Aussie friends who during their teenage years spoke of plans to go back to the motherland, back to England. During their 20s, a homing instinct impelled by longing and pride to visit family, to reconnect to ancestry, to their roots. And I envied them. They had a homeland to go back to, unlike myself, whose homeland was under communist rule, whose homeland my parents could barely speak about because of the weight of their pain, whose homeland was depicted in the media as a war-torn shithole. I never imagined that the strange, circuitous route of life would lead me to connecting with England as part of a colonial heritage that offers me a comforting feeling of home. I was in central London and there was a parade on. In the distance, I saw lots of green, the hue of bright springtime grass across rolling hills and the colour of the leaves of daffodils and crocuses and lily whites. And I figured it was some Irish thing because obviously green equals Ireland. I ignored the parade because I don't like crowds. And then bagpipes. And I go running towards the crowd. I have so many memories as a child of Tara Screech Powell's father playing his pipes in full regalia with pride and with longing, calling in his ancestors to help him raise 4 girls far from home, to help him to remember who he is and where he comes from. I often think of the bagpipes as a male version of keening, the wail of grief, moved through an organ held close to the body. Every single Anzac Day, Armistice Day, Australia Day, on nearly all Australian federal government holidays and celebrations, the bagpipes come out, a reminder of an ancestry, of a cultural heritage and tradition to which I do not belong. And yet here I am, running towards the call of the bagpipes. The next few pieces are about war. You know, leaving Vietnam at the age of 2 has left a legacy on myself and my family that has taken me an entire lifetime to make sense of as Vietnamese people. And similar to Vietnam veterans, I learned a fundamental sense of identity shame about who I am because of a connection to a war that I wanted no part in. And as a small child, I learned not to look into people's eyes, to avoid seeing your guilt and pity. And to avoid seeing the ghosts of your dead and wounded relatives whose soul wounds you can't reach either. And so these themes of historical trauma and intergenerational trauma and survivor guilt and PTSD and auto-hypnosis storytelling, all underpinned by a fundamental sense of identity shame, and we can throw in there some imposter syndrome. It impacts refugees and military members alike and their families. And so in 2021, I was invited by Charlie Pacello to speak to Vietnam veterans. So he invited me to speak to American Vietnam veterans, not Vietnamese Vietnam veterans. And he asked me to share my story about what happened to my family after US troop withdrawal and the subsequent communist takeover of Vietnam. And so in preparation for sharing with these American Vietnam veterans and adult children of American Vietnam veterans, I brought up the topic of war into my regular weekly addiction recovery support group. And I've attended hundreds of addiction recovery support groups over the years. And they've all had various focuses: codependence, addiction rock bottoms, feelings, resentments, family patterns, family of origin dynamics, childhood abuse, abandonment wounds, trauma recovery, but not once has the topic of war been raised. Not once. And I own a significant number of daily meditation readers that are used in addiction recovery groups, all bereft of the mention of war. And we don't talk about war, not even in the places where we go to talk about the things that we'd rather forget. And so that week in my weekly community support group, I brought up the topic. My husband was terribly abusive, PTSD from the Vietnam War. He's drunk. He's been drunk every day since he got back from Vietnam. My father was a mean motherfucker, PTSD from World War II. My grandfather left Palestine during the war with Israel and made it to the United States. I'm a veteran and I can't unsee the things that I saw. My family were refugees seeking refuge from the aftermath of war. And I was horrified. Every single person in the meeting that day had been impacted by war, directly or indirectly. And we need to speak truthfully about the impact of war on our ancestors, ourselves and our descendants, on our society, without blaming or shaming or getting all political and intellectual. lest we forget. This piece of poetry arose after sharing my story with Charlie Pacello to these American Vietnam veterans and adult children of American Vietnam veterans. Because in that emergent space, I realized we actually had a lot more in common than what I realized. And so this piece is titled, We Don't Leave Our Family, We Don't Leave Our People Behind. We don't leave our people behind. As soon as my parents were established barely enough, they began to sort through the multi-year complicated and expensive immigration paperwork process. While raising two girls, paying a mortgage, both working in manufacturing and dad getting as much overtime as possible. They scrimped and saved and managed to sponsor out to Australia mum's sister, her husband and their three children, who'd spent the previous few years living in a refugee camp in Indonesia. After helping them to get on their feet somewhat, mum and dad then worked towards sponsoring mum's parents, who were still living in Vietnam, to come and live with us. Angwai and Bangwai, although in their 60s, were not able to enjoy a slower pace of life, knowing that some of their adult children were still struggling. After a few months, they got manual labour jobs in factories doing piecework, earning $2.50 to $4.50 an hour. They managed to save up close to $20,000 to sponsor out to Australia an adult daughter who was a single mother and her child, knowing that their lives in Vietnam would get even harder without Angwai and Bangwai around. As a young teen, I knew that there were bonds of love that I didn't understand, and yet I struggled with unnameable feelings of emotional deprivation. I knew that my parents loved us because they were always working. Then I saw them continuing to work, labouring with love and loyalty for the benefit and betterment of family members. Immersed in Western cultural notions of romantic love, I resented the silent, survivor guilt-fueled, obligation-driven notions of filial piety as a way of stoically defending my birthright to joyous love, untainted by threat of loss. As a young adult, my romantic relationships reflected this sense of being burdened by loving and being loved, and rejecting the responsibilities that come with love, while deeply yearning for that which I wasn't yet able to truly let in. It was messy. All because it's hard to let in that kind of love, my parents' love. The kind of love where my parents risked death for their children's futures. For me. For the idea of me, for what I represented to them, hope and courage and a love so strong that their own feelings of hardship became endurable and surmountable. Oh, you're so lucky you made it out of Vietnam with your family, I'd hear well-meaning Anglo-Australians say. Somewhere during my mid-30s, I realised why that phrase never landed quite right for me. In my culture, a family is not two parents and their children. Family is village, clan, tribe. A communal love tethers us, strengthens us, anchors us, and compels us forward, forging a future to honour our lineage of ancestors. We don't leave our people behind.
Oh my word. As far as I'm concerned, if we have the time, you can go on for another hour and a half. But since we have another show after this,
Yes, we do have another show after this.
so first of all, y'all, open up your mics and throw this woman some roses. That was, I have no words. And for a poet to say that is unheard of, but that was beyond brilliant and heartbreaking and joyous in its way and passionate. Thank you so much. As I said, y'all open up your mics, throw this woman some roses.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much, Linda. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Really, I feel the same way. I don't have words for it. I just so deeply thank you. Hmm, hmm.
I do want to remind folks that what we have coming up next are is our Woman Heart show. Woman Heart is Tesoro's open mic for women and folks who identify as women only. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to take this room down and then I'll bring it back up in about 5 minutes. You can click back in and come and join us. If you would like to donate to Tesoro's Flow, you can go to poetswind@hotmail.com on PayPal. It's in the chat. And whatever you donate, 90% goes to our feature because artists need to get paid. 10% comes back to Tesoro so that we can keep the lights on, so that we can do shows like this, bring other artists on. I want to thank once again Linda Ty for a show that will alternately make me laugh and break my heart for quite a while to come. In the meantime, as I tell folks, Tesoro has something going on every Friday up until November the 20th of this year. If you're interested in seeing what we do, go to www.firesingers.com and wander around, see who we are. We have, as I say, a Woman Heart event coming on almost immediately after this show. Our other open mic is a general open mic that's called Pen and Sword. We have an array of unbelievable voices coming up on that one. We will have more of these aperitif concerts because there are just too many other fantastic women in the world that I want to interview and hear from. And if you are in and around the Los Angeles area, or you feel like chartering a jet or taking a train, or, as Aletha Adams saying, I don't care how you get there if you can. On August the 19th, Tesoro is doing a takeover of the open mic at the Sims Library of Poetry in Los Angeles. If you need more information, if you go to the Sims Library of Poetry website, you can find out where to purchase tickets. This will be a hybrid event so that you can either be there in person, which we would love because we want folks to make some noise, or you can attend online. Linda, honey, thank you again so much. This has been absolutely fantastic, y'all. As I say, open up your mics. Show this lady some roses one more time. I am not good with time zones because we have members all over the world and I never remember where anybody is. So I just say wherever you are at whatever season of the day or night it happens to be, have a fantastic whatever it needs to be. And we will most surely see you around the way. Y'all have a fantastic going forth.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, everyone.
Amazing, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda. Another layer every time I see you. Thanks a lot.